It was early in the morning, but the taxi depot was already bustling with activity. Young taxi driver Margaret had been tinkering under the hood of her car for the past half hour, completely absorbed in her work. A deep male voice sounded from behind her. "Hello, Margaret. It's morning, and you're already busy with your car. What happened? Do you need some help?" Startled, Margaret straightened up, wiped the sweat from her forehead. She looked quite comical, with her nose smeared with engine oil and holding a dirty rag and a wrench in her hands. "Hello, Charles. I've already sorted it out, thanks. Something was wrong with the ignition, but I changed the spark plugs. I'll wash up now, and we can have some coffee. Fetch that cake from the bag. I baked it last night. Enjoy." Charles wiped his hands and happily dug into the cake, praising her culinary skills. "Oh, Margaret, you're something else. It's so delicious. You can fix cars, bake cakes, and you're a beauty. It's a shame I'm married, and your fiancé is a fool. He should appreciate and cherish a smart woman like you." Margaret sighed heavily, sat down beside him, took a sip of the aromatic coffee, and replied, "Men are all the same. First, they promise love and loyalty, and then they leave. Well, no matter. I'll save up money and have a baby on my own. I don't need anyone. Just be careful not to let Jacob know that I'm expecting, or that greedy man will surely fire me." Margaret didn't have a chance to finish her meal as her radio squawked, and the dispatcher informed her that it was time to head out to a customer. She shook hands with her colleague and drove off, humming a tune to herself. In reality, Margaret quite enjoyed her job as a taxi driver. The days were never dull, with interactions with customers often leading to fresh news and interesting life stories. But there were occasional mishaps as well. However, if someone had told her 3 months ago that she would be working as a taxi driver, she probably wouldn't have believed it herself. Margaret's childhood was spent in a village. Her mother passed away when she was just 5 years old, succumbing to a long and severe kidney disease. She had never known her father. After her mother's death, her upbringing fell to her grandfather, Carl. He couldn't bear the thought of his beloved granddaughter ending up in an orphanage, so he took her to a small settlement. Margaret loved it there. Vast wheat fields, open spaces, fragrant hay, and her favorite cat. Her grandpa adored her and taught her everything he knew, from mowing the grass to driving and repairing old cars. Together, they overhauled an entire car, and by the time Margaret was 16, she could drive as well as an experienced man. She passed her driver's test on the first try. Eventually, she decided to move to the city to make a life for herself because she understood there were no prospects in the small settlement. The youth had scattered, leaving only the elderly residents. Her grandpa gave her his modest savings and blessed his girl. Margaret rented a room and found a job as a waitress in a small cafe. She didn't particularly like this job, standing on her feet all day, and by the end of her shift, her back would ache terribly. But she had to make a living somehow. During her lunch break at the cafe, a young and handsome man would visit every day. He always ordered coffee, sandwiches, and leisurely enjoyed his meal. He also looked at Margaret with intense interest, never taking his eyes off her. Margaret was equally taken with the young man, and she would blush slightly every time she brought him his order. That's how they met. The young man's name was Andrew, and he worked as a manager for a small tourist company nearby. He lived with his parents, who worked at a bank. A typical family. Andrew complimented Margaret, flirted with her, and one day, he brought a beautiful bouquet of delicate pink roses, handing them to her. "You are as beautiful as these flowers. I think about you all the time. I'd like to invite you to the movies. I've got 2 tickets to a premiere. Will you come?" Margaret gladly accepted, and her heart raced. That's how they began dating. Andrew would walk Margaret home, meet her after her shift, and one day, he stayed over. Margaret was overjoyed, thinking that they'd get married soon, and Andrew had also hinted at it. But one day, everything changed. Margaret realized she was pregnant, took a test, and felt a bit scared. She and Andrew hadn't talked about children, and they weren't even married yet. That evening, she decided to tell her fiancé everything and see his reaction. Andrew remained silent for a long time, looked troubled, and it was clear that the news did not please him. Margaret even felt a little hurt. "Darling, aren't you happy? This is our child, yours and mine. We need to get married soon, especially before the baby bump shows." Andrew mumbled vaguely, Well, I guess. It's just a bit early, don't you think? How did this happen? I thought you were using protection. Okay, I'll talk to my parents and let them know about this. After this unpleasant conversation, the fiancé disappeared. He didn't answer calls, and he stopped coming to the cafe for lunch. Margaret was nervous and cried endlessly. She couldn't understand what had happened. Why was Andrew acting this way? Had he chickened out? Then her coworker told her something. Margaret, don't be too upset, but I saw your Andrew at the mall yesterday. He was walking hand in hand with another girl, and when he saw me, he turned away as if he didn't know me. I could be wrong, but it looks pretty clear to me. Your Andrew has found someone else. Margaret cried and couldn't believe it. How is this possible? How could he? Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe she's his relative. I have to find out. Otherwise, I'll go crazy. Margaret took time off from work and began to keep an eye on Andrew near his office. She waited for a whole 2 hours. Finally, he came out, but not alone. He was walking hand in hand with that same girl. She opened the door of a fancy car, and Andrew immediately got in, and they started passionately kissing right there. Margaret's vision darkened, and she felt unbearable pain. Not in control of herself, she rushed to the car, banging on the window and shouting, "You traitor! What about me? Aren't you ashamed, you scoundrel?" A frightened Andrew jumped out, approached Margaret, and tried to push her away. "Forgive me, it just happened. Bridget is now my fiancée. My parents decided that. I told them everything, and they forbade me from seeing you. Please, Margaret, go away. It's over between us." Margaret was stunned by this and gave Andrew a resounding slap. "But I'm pregnant with your child. What am I supposed to do now? Don't you care?" Andrew evaded responsibility and tried to justify himself. "I don't know. Just go to the hospital and get an abortion. What's the big deal, Margaret? Please don't shout. Just go, I beg you." At that moment, the other girl leisurely stepped out of the car, gave Margaret a disdainful look, and asked, "I don't quite understand. Who is this, Andrew? What does this crazy woman want from you?" Andrew pushed Margaret away and replied, "Everything's fine. She's just confused." Bridget approached Margaret, looked her straight in the eyes, and sternly said, "This guy is mine now. That's my decision. You bet not get in my way, or else it won't end well for you. My father has some serious connections. Get out of here, you fool." Andrew and Bridget drove away, splashing Margaret with mud from head to toe, and she just stood there in the parking lot, unable to move. It felt like a nightmare, a bad dream. Margaret didn't go to work. She physically couldn't. She spent a week crying at home, literally wailing with sorrow and betrayal. At one point, she even considered going for an abortion to try to solve all her problems in one go. But Margaret was terrified. What if something went wrong, and she wouldn't be able to have children in the future? How could she take the life of an innocent child? In one of those days, her neighbor Charles stopped by. He needed a painkiller for his child who was feeling unwell. Seeing Margaret in her state, he was shocked. He practically dragged her into his room, while his wife, Batty, waved her hands in disbelief. Together, they calmed Margaret down with sedatives, hot tea, and patiently listened to her story. Margaret needed to talk to someone. The pain of her beloved's betrayal was tearing her heart apart. She told them everything. Charles listened, nodded, stayed silent, and then quietly asked, "So, what are you going to do?" Margaret shrugged. "I've missed a week of work at the cafe. They've probably fired me, especially since I was working there illegally. I'll have to go back to the village, to my grandpa, but I don't know how I'll be able to face him." Charles scratched his head. "No, going back to the village is not the solution. What will you do there? Listen, you said you're good at driving. Come to our taxi company to work. We're short on drivers right now. True, our owner, Jacob, watches everyone closely, but we pay a decent salary. You can save money for your child and maternity leave. Just don't mention your pregnancy, and I'll try not to let it slip. If the owner finds out, he won't take you." Margaret wiped away her tears and looked at her neighbor with gratitude. "Thank you, Charles. This is my dream job. I've loved speed and roads since I was a child, and I'm a skilled driver, trust me. I'll start a new life for sure. I never really liked that cafe from the beginning. I'll come tomorrow, okay? Thanks, guys." Batty patted Margaret on the shoulder. "Well done, Margaret. You can't give up. Are you going to let your life be ruined because of that scoundrel? When you have your baby, you'll understand that it's your greatest happiness. You can do it all. And if you ever need help, don't worry. We'll be here for you." That's how Margaret ended up working for the taxi service. Initially, Jacob didn't believe she could do it, but then he saw how confidently Margaret handled the car, fixed minor issues herself, and efficiently carried out her duties. He decided to hire her. Margaret felt encouraged. She no longer had time to suffer and cry. She spent her entire day behind the wheel and with passengers. Plus, she enjoyed the job, and she eagerly ran to it. Her pregnancy wasn't showing yet, and she wore sporty clothes, so she could continue working almost until her maternity leave. Fortunately, her health remained good, and she suffered from minimal morning sickness. The only downside was the very frugal owner, who demanded minute-by-minute reports at the end of each shift if the car stopped anywhere or deviated from the route. He even installed a hidden camera in the vehicle to monitor how his drivers interacted with customers. However, her colleagues were fantastic. Margaret admitted that it was easier to work with men because there was no gossip and judgment. Everyone was focused on their job. She and Charles remained friends. They would have tea from a thermos and talk about life. He taught her the intricacies of their work and helped her get started. Today, Margaret received a splendid order. She had to drive far outside the city. The man on the phone mentioned that he would pay any amount just to get to the city, so she anticipated decent earnings due to the long distance. Margaret was in a great mood, humming a song as she drove to the customer. She was already planning where to place the crib, where to buy a stroller at a reasonable price, and how much money she needed to save for all of it. She tried not to think about en route. Although it was challenging, she fought back the treacherous lump in her throat. However, her mood quickly dissipated upon arrival. It was a huge country mansion, and there was a grand party going on. The customer was heavily intoxicated, sometimes trying to get into the taxi, and other times shouting that he wouldn't go anywhere. After 10 minutes, the homeowner canceled the order completely. Margaret was extremely disappointed since she had spent both time and money on gasoline without any earnings. But how was it her fault that things turned out this way? Margaret called the owner, explained everything, and asked what she should do. He instructed her to return to the taxi company. Her mood was at an all-time low, and to make matters worse, the weather had turned bad, pouring down heavy rain. She was halfway back to the city when a vagrant stumbled out of the woods, swaying from side to side, and walked along the road, falling and getting up again. He was covered in dirt and looked very disheveled, with a face caked in dried blood. Margaret couldn't drive past him and slammed on the brakes. She decided that if he was drunk, she wouldn't pick him up. She pulled her jacket's hood over her head and rushed out of the car. Approaching the man, she scrutinized him. "Hey, are you okay? Can I help you with something? Where are you headed? If it's to the city, I can give you a lift," she said. He looked at her with unfocused eyes and mumbled with cracked lips, "Help." Immediately, he lost consciousness and slumped to the ground by the roadside. But there was no smell of alcohol on him. Margaret gently shook the man, urging him to wake up. "Please, you need to wake up. I can't get you to the car by myself. Come on, like this." Carefully, Margaret managed to get the man into the car, and she drove him to the hospital. On the way, she tried to get some information from him, like who he was and where he came from, but he only mentioned his name was Liam and nothing else. He groaned in pain. Margaret dropped him off at the hospital, ensured he received medical attention, and even paid for his treatments since he had no identification. As she left, she wished him well, saying, "Get better soon. All the best to you." The girl rushed back to the taxi company, knowing that she was already delayed and Jacob would likely scold her. She had completely forgotten about the hidden camera in the car, but her boss was sitting in his office, watching her every move. He was furious, and as soon as the taxi driver arrived, he gave her an earful. "What do you think you're doing? You refused to take a customer, wasted my gas, and now you're picking up homeless people. I've lost so much money because of you." Margaret was close to tears and defended herself. "Why are you talking to me like this? On what grounds? I called you." The customer was in no condition to travel, and he canceled the ride. "As for this poor man, I found him on my way. Was I supposed to leave him to die?" Jacob, infuriated, shouted even louder. "Well, then you'll pay from your own pocket for saving a dying man." I'll deduct the cost of the gas from your salary and remove your bonus so others don't get any ideas. Now, go to work. You've all gone mad, doing whatever you want. And don't forget to clean the car. There's dirt all over the backseat. How can decent people sit there now? Margaret washed the car and fought with disappointment. Well, there you have it, trying to do good deeds. I tried to help, and look where it got me. Jacob is such a scoundrel. He's got no compassion whatsoever. She barely made it through her shift, returned home tired and sad, and after a shower, promptly fell asleep. She had no energy left. But early the next morning, she was awakened by a knock at the door, followed by more banging and voices. A groggy Margaret staggered to answer, thinking to herself, "What on earth is going on? Can't they let me sleep? I live alone, for heaven's sake." She was stunned when she saw three very well-dressed men at her doorstep. Two of them appeared to be bodyguards, and the third, a portly, unpleasant elderly man, was clearly the owner. He walked in without an invitation and began, "Good morning. Are you Margaret? You saved my son yesterday, picked him up from the road, and took him to the hospital. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you for not letting that man die. I've come to thank you personally." The man placed a plump envelope on a side table. Margaret waved her hands and said, "No, there's no need. I just felt sorry for him. The poor guy was severely beaten, barely able to walk, dressed in rags. How did he end up there at all?" It was clear that the businessman didn't expect such a question, but he still answered, "My son was kidnapped by gangsters, held in a cabin in the woods, but he miraculously managed to escape, and he was trying to make it home. Tell me, did he say anything to you on the way?" Margaret shook her head. "He was in terrible pain, moaning, and that's about it." The man smirked. "All right, it's time for us to go, but please, take the money. I know your boss scolded you, so consider it compensation for the trouble. Goodbye." The trio departed, and Margaret rushed to the window. A convoy of expensive cars was parked near her dormitory. She counted 5 of them. That was quite something. Margaret counted the money in the envelope. It was a substantial sum by her standards. She thought to herself, "No, something's not right here. Firstly, they don't seem at all concerned. No signs of worry or regret about their son's fate. Their eyes are cold and calculating. Close relatives don't behave like this. Secondly, why was he so concerned about whether his son had slipped up and revealed something? It means he has something to hide. Thirdly, how did this man find out everything about me so quickly? And most importantly, why did he come here? So, these funds are not gratitude at all. It's payment for my silence. No, I need to go to the hospital again and check on Liam." Margaret bought some food on her way and headed to the trauma department, where she had left Liam the day before. However, they wouldn't let her in. She couldn't understand why. "Why can't I visit him for a short while? I won't stay long. I just want to inquire about his health. Please let me in, just for a moment," she implored. A doctor came down and sternly said, "Unfortunately, we cannot allow you to see Liam. He unexpectedly fell into a coma and is currently in the intensive care unit, where access is restricted." "I'm sorry." Margaret was in shock. "How can that be? He was weak and battered yesterday, but he was walking on his own. And now he suddenly fell into a coma. What happened to him? Please, tell me." The doctor brushed her off. "Why should I explain myself to you? Who are you to him? His father is on duty here. He knows everything. You'll be informed when you can visit. But for now, his condition is extremely critical. I don't have time to argue with you. Other patients are waiting. Farewell." Margaret was deeply upset and was about to leave the department when a nurse caught up with her. "It's not as the doctor said. You're Liam's fiancé, aren't you? I figured it out immediately. Something isn't right here. He didn't fall into any coma. They're just feeding him some kind of medication, and we don't understand why. But I overheard that the wealthy man, who seems to be his father, gave a significant bribe to our doctor and asked to make sure that Liam never leaves the hospital. Never. I was the one who treated his wounds yesterday. There was nothing serious there." Margaret was in shock. She had no idea what to do. How could she help Liam? She scolded herself. "There you go, getting involved in another situation. I have enough problems of my own, and here I am worrying about someone else's troubles. My character is foolish." The girl wrestled with her feelings and doubts all night, unable to close her eyes. By morning, she had resolved that she couldn't live with peace of mind if she didn't save Liam. After all, he was her age. Why should he die? It was wrong and unjust. Her initial impulse was to rush to the police and tell them everything she knew. But then she changed her mind. With a man that wealthy, he likely had connections within the police force. And what could she accuse him of? Right now, it was all just rumors. There was no concrete evidence. The worst part was that she had no one to turn to. That's when Margaret remembered the nurse, Vivian. She decided to meet with her again and arranged to meet at a cafe. Surprised, Vivian arrived on time but was unsure of how she could help. Margaret started the conversation. "I'm sorry for bothering you again, but I have nowhere else to turn. You can't just tell people about this. No one would believe it. Please, help me save Liam. I want to get him out of the hospital. I can get a car. I know how to drive. The only question is how to get him out. He's in a coma right now." Vivian fought for a moment and replied, "Let's think this through. I'm on the night shift the day after tomorrow. I can skip his injection and then the patient should wake up in about a day. You'll bring your car to the back exit near the laundry room. There are no cameras there. I'll give you a white coat, a cap, and a mask. We can try to do this together. I'm afraid to involve anyone else. I can't trust anyone 100%. But we'll need to come up with a story for when they start searching for him. This is happening on my shift. I can imagine what will happen to me. They might even fire me for this, but you know what? Let them fire me. What are they doing? Poisoning a healthy person? So, what's your plan? Where will you take Liam?" Margaret sighed heavily. "I don't have a plan. I'll take him to my place. That's the only option. And when he wakes up and tells us who kidnapped him and why, we'll go to the police." It's a very strange story. That's where they left it. Margaret was so nervous these 3 days that she could barely complete her shift, and on the appointed day, she was trembling throughout. She was afraid that nothing would work out. Or what if Liam didn't wake up at her place? What then? But it was too late to turn back, and in the evening, after completing a customer's ride, she disabled the camera in her car. She parked her car in the hospital's backyard as per the plan, changed into the disguise Vivian had prepared, and crossed herself. Vivian was waiting for her in the ward. Together, they laid Liam on a gurney and wheeled him to the exit. The gurney clanged against the hospital's tiled floors, and Margaret's heart raced. She kept praying that no one would come their way. Vivian had fought ahead and covered Liam's head with a sheet. Luckily, their plan went off without a hitch. At that late hour, all the patients were asleep, as was the attending doctor. Once they'd safely placed Liam in the back seat of her car, Margaret accelerated onto the highway, her heart pounding furiously. She felt like a criminal, constantly glancing around and fearing surveillance. Finally, near her home, she called Charles. "Charles, please come out for a moment. I need your help." "I'm sorry it's so late." The man was shocked when he saw the unconscious guy on the back seat, while Margaret said, "Help, don't just stand there. I can't lift him alone. We need to take him to my room. Just don't ask any questions, okay? I'll explain everything later, I promise." Without further ado, Charles helped carry Liam to the room and laid him on the couch. He then said, "Margaret, you really do get yourself into some situations, don't you? Who is this sleeping beauty? Did you take a car from the taxi service again? Did anyone see you?" Margaret shook her head negatively. "No one saw me. I disabled the camera. I'll return everything to its place. You won't tell anyone, right? I'm not doing anything wrong, quite the opposite. I want to save this person from death. Do you believe me?" Charles waved his hand. "I won't tell anyone, but I don't want to know more than I already do. I'm sorry. Well, I'm heading home. I helped as much as I could." Margaret returned the car to the taxi service, and it seemed like everything went smoothly. Nevertheless, she was trembling as if she had a fever. So many incidents and emotions in one evening, and on top of it, her pregnancy. She arrived home on the last bus, checked that Liam was breathing, and collapsed beside him, utterly drained. She was anxious and in tears, thinking, "My goodness, what have I gotten myself into? Charles is right. This is very dangerous. What if that rich man finds me? What will happen to me? And to Liam? I don't even have anyone to protect me." A day passed, and Liam finally started to regain consciousness. He squinted at the sun and turned his head, not understanding where he was. He asked, "Excuse me, miss, where am I? Why am I not in the hospital? Oh, I think I remember you. You are the taxi driver who saved me on the highway." Margaret told Liam everything she knew. The young man listened attentively, didn't interrupt, remained silent for a long time, and then began to tell his own story. "It's not my father. But for you all to understand, I'll start from the very beginning. My parents were very wealthy people. My father was a businessman with a chain of hotels around the city. My mother was a prominent lawyer. So, when I was 3 years old, my father started receiving threats from his competitors. They threatened him and his family, demanding that he give up his business. That's when my father decided to play it safe and wrote a will. In it, he stated that all his property, valuable assets, and money would be mine, but only when I reached the age of 23. I believe it all started because of this will, because I'm turning 23 exactly a week from now. So, my father was very close to his associate, Winston, who was his assistant and even a distant relative. My father trusted him completely, like family. Soon after the threats, the criminals acted on their words and attacked my father, shooting him in his car. My mother, overwhelmed by grief and stress, had a weak heart and passed away soon after. She couldn't handle all these troubles and tragedies. So, at the age of 3, I became an orphan. It was my father's associate, Winston, who took me under his wing. He was the one who assumed control of my father's business, and as far back as I can remember, my stepfather never really showed any affection toward me. He didn't beat or mistreat me, but he never loved me either. When I turned 13, my stepfather married a young woman, Gabriel. That's when I became superfluous. I was immediately sent to study at a prestigious private school in England. I stayed there and then went on to university, which I successfully completed. Finally, I decided to return home. I wanted to start my own business, but my stepfather didn't like the idea. He wanted to keep controlling me, just like he did before. I only found out about the will by accident when I went to visit my old nanny. She told me everything because she had been there with me throughout those early events. She had seen and heard everything but knew how to keep her lips sealed. When I had an argument with my stepfather and started looking for the notary who had held my father's will for all these years, that's when everything began. At first, I started receiving threats on the phone, but unfortunately, I didn't take them seriously. A week later, the gang kidnapped me, held me captive in an abandoned ranger's cabin in the woods. They beat me and demanded that I renounce the will. I was just lucky to escape. Now, I have no doubt who's behind my kidnapping and who stood to gain from me renouncing it. Margaret exclaimed. "Well, it's obvious, Liam. Of course, it's your stepfather. Who else could it be? We need to go to the police immediately and raise the alarm. He won't rest until he eliminates you." Liam replied evasively, "Well, it seems that way, but I can't understand why my stepfather didn't try to get rid of me earlier, when I was just a child. You see, there's an addendum in the will that if I can't inherit the assets for some reason, then everything goes to Winston." Margaret said, "So, you've been incredibly lucky, and your stepfather simply didn't know about the existence of the will until recently, when you told him. But I'm sure he's involved in your kidnapping." I saw his eyes. Cold, calculating, and malevolent. Margaret took Liam to the police, where he shared the harrowing details of his past. A criminal case was initiated, and after a lengthy and thorough investigation, horrifying revelations came to light. It turned out that Winston not only organized and financed Liam's kidnapping but also had a hand in the murder of his biological father. Liam couldn't believe it. He was shaken to his core. He persuaded the investigator to arrange a meeting with his stepfather. Liam wanted to look him in the eyes and ask just one question. Why? He thought that his stepfather would finally show remorse and ask for forgiveness, considering the lifelong prison sentence looming over him. However, that's not how it played out. This wretch behaved arrogantly and shamelessly. "Well, are you happy now? I have to admit I'm getting older, becoming sentimental, and gave you a chance. We should have finished you off right away, out there in the woods. I kept prolonging it. After all, you were like a son to me," his stepfather remarked with an air of brazenness. Liam choked with disbelief. "Like a son? How can you say something like that? You promised me since childhood that you would find my father's killer, that you mourned him too, that you were grateful to him. But with your own hands, you gave the order to have him eliminated. Because of you, my mother died soon after. You've ruined my life. Answer me, why didn't you eliminate me earlier? Why did you pay for my education at a private school for so many years? You never loved me. I know that. You merely tolerated me. The businessman gave an unpleasant smirk. I pitied you at first, and I didn't know about your father's will. Is that clear to you? My reputation in high society was impeccable. I took it upon myself to raise my late companion's son. It diverted all suspicion away from me. I was respected by everyone. It was only when you recently let slip about the will that I was taken aback. I couldn't let you inherit all that wealth. It would have been too generous a gift for you. So, all these years, I've been building the business, investing my time and effort, and now it's all supposed to go to you. No way. I had it all figured out, carefully planned. But you managed to escape from that cabin in the woods. And everything would have worked out if not for that taxi driver. First, she picked you up on the road, and then she drove you out of the hospital. I despise her. She ruined my entire plan. Liam protested. Don't you dare insult Margaret. She's the best person on earth. Well, no matter. You'll pay for everything. Winston leaned forward and hissed maliciously. You are very mistaken. I have such connections, such opportunities that I'll be free again very soon. Just wait and see. However, the court ruled with justice, and the businessman killer received a severe punishment. Instead of a life of luxury, a prison cell awaited him for the rest of his life. He shouted in court, expressing his hatred for Margaret and blaming her for everything. Liam took charge of the company and immersed himself in his work. He and Margaret often saw each other, forming a close friendship. In truth, Liam was secretly in love with her, never having met anyone quite like her. He adored everything about this spirited, curly-haired, playful girl, her infectious laughter, her beautiful curls, and her kind, affectionate eyes. But he couldn't muster the courage to confess his feelings, especially as she carried another man's child and was preparing for childbirth. He feared that revealing his feelings would offend her and destroy their warm, trusting relationship. So, Liam tried to protect and care for her. He insisted that Margaret move out of her old place and found her a cozy apartment. He also convinced her to quit her taxi job since her pregnancy was becoming more and more apparent. Liam provided financial assistance and made sure she lacked nothing. Margaret felt overwhelmed by his generosity. Liam, you're spoiling me completely. No one has ever taken such good care of me. Thank you so much. It's just a shame that I had to quit my job. I'm getting so bored just sitting around, she said. Liam replied softly, looking into her eyes. Margaret, it's the least I can do for you. You're not a stranger to me now. You're the closest person. Don't worry. Soon, when the baby arrives, you won't have time to be bored. You know I'll be there to welcome the little one at the maternity ward. Will you consider me as the godfather? Margaret was moved to tears, and she replied quietly, Of course. What are you even talking about? You know, Liam, I feel so comfortable and at ease with you. It's a shame we didn't meet earlier. Sully, we can't turn back time. Margaret's heart was also burning with love for Liam. She felt drawn to him like a magnet but couldn't even dare to think about it. She kept reprimanding herself. Get a hold of yourself. Don't you dare dream about him. Why would he want another man's child? Don't ruin his life. But why does he care so much about me? Not every man is capable of this. Could it be just out of gratitude? I must convince myself that he's just a friend. Nothing more can happen between us. Margaret was tormented by her emotions and doubts, and she had no one to talk to about it. One day, after leaving her prenatal appointment, she bumped into Vivian, the very nurse who had helped her save Liam. Both girls were thrilled to meet again, and they decided to have lunch at a nearby cafe and catch up. Vivian looked at Margaret with admiration as she walked, waddling comically like a duck, and said, Oh, dear, pregnancy really suits you. You look positively radiant. Now, tell me, how did your detective story with the kidnapping end? I often thought about you. They nearly fired me back then, and I received a lot of scolding and wrote a statement, but it was all worth it. You should have seen the head doctor's face when he realized his missing patient had been well taken care of. But when the investigation started, Our corrupt doctor finally lost his seat. Margaret smiled and replied, I thought about you too, Vivian. Sometimes, you just want to talk to someone who will understand, listen, and not judge. As for my pregnancy, it's a rather complicated story. I'll tell you, but you won't believe it. Liam is not my fiancé, although I deeply regret it. Margaret then shared her story with Vivian, starting from her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. Vivian could only shake her head in disbelief. You are truly amazing, my friend. I genuinely admire your courage to take such a risk for a nearly unfamiliar person, especially while being pregnant. That's commendable. Your Liam should be eternally grateful to you. And as for the rest, I'll say this. Don't exhaust yourself with unnecessary worries. Trust your heart and fate. Everything will work out as it should. Give birth to your baby. Love and nurture the child. It's the greatest happiness. If Liam genuinely loves you, he will propose sooner or later, and the baby won't be a hindrance at all. I did something foolish in my youth. I had a heated argument with my fiancé, and without much thought, I had an abortion. Now, I'm almost 30, and I have neither children or a husband. You know how many times I've regretted my decision. I could have been raising a child and not feeling so alone. But you, well done. Margaret suddenly suggested, come over to my place, Vivian. I'd be delighted, honestly. I've never had real friends before, and I trust you. I feel like you're a good person. So, shall we be friends? Vivian happily agreed, saying, I'd love to. I have Sundays off. If you want, we can go for a walk, check out cute baby things, trendy strollers, and just chat. From that day on, Margaret and Vivian became friends. They always had something to talk about, and they seemed to have an internal closeness, almost like sisters. When contractions started in the middle of the night, Margaret, without hesitation, called Vivian. Vivian, I'm sorry for calling so late. It seems like it's starting. My stomach hurts so much, it squeezes and releases. I'm out of energy. I'm so scared. What should I do? Her friend immediately woke up and began giving her clear instructions. First, calm down. I'll arrange for a team of doctors to come to your house, and in the meantime, get dressed, get ready, and wait for me. Don't forget the most important things, your documents and your exchange card. And remember, everything will be fine. There's a great obstetrician on duty today, and I'll be right there. Vivian also called Liam. Wake up, Romeo. Your Juliet is giving birth. Let's go help. Sleep quickly faded, and Liam shouted into the phone. Where should I go? 15 minutes later, there was a crowd at Margaret's apartment. The ambulance team, Liam, and Vivian were all there. Margaret was relieved. She wasn't alone, and it wasn't as frightening. When Margaret was taken to the delivery room, Liam and Vivian waited in the corridor. Liam was very nervous. Vivian, you're a nurse. Tell me, is Margaret going to be okay? It feels like it's taking forever. Why hasn't she given birth yet? Could something be wrong? Vivian tried to reassure him. Have some coffee and calm down. It's her first labor, and it can take some time. Based on the frequency of her contractions, I think she'll give birth in a couple of hours. Tell me, do you love her? Liam blushed but answered honestly. Very much. More than life itself. And I don't know what to do about it. Vivian laughed and said, well, you guys are really funny. What's there to think about? If you love her, marry her and raise your son together. Both of you are suffering while pretending to be just friends. Liam perked up and said, do you think she loves me too? Honestly, I'm afraid to confess my feelings. I worry I might hurt her. I can't sleep or eat. She's on my mind all the time. Vivian reassured him. Absolutely, she loves you. Trust me. She's also scared and shy about it. Be more decisive, Liam. We're romantic, always waiting for the man to take the first step. So, don't miss your chance. Finally, a nurse came out and announced, well, Dad, congratulations. You have a little warrior, a boy, 4 kilograms. Your wife gave birth without any complications, thank God. You can go home now. You can visit her tomorrow. Liam nearly shouted with joy, thank you. That's great news. Vivian, did you hear? We have a boy. The nurse chuckled. I told you everything would be fine. Go get some rest, you lucky man. As a doctor, I'll visit our friend. I'm allowed to. Margaret blissfully smiled, closing her eyes. Her baby boy lay on her chest. It was touching and delightful. All the hours of pain were worth it. The name for her son just popped into her head, Tyler. It couldn't be any other way. And she didn't care who his father was. What mattered most was that he was her own son, and now her life didn't belong to her alone. The door to the room opened, and Vivian walked in. She approached her friend and kissed her. "Well, congratulations, Margaret. How are you feeling?" Margaret laughed and replied, "To be honest, it wasn't easy. The doctors were even worried I wouldn't manage it myself." "Is Liam at home now?" Vivian chuckled. "They barely managed to get him to leave. You should have seen how worried he was for you, pacing like a caged tiger, pestering me with questions. He loves you, Margaret, that's for sure. I think he'll propose soon." Margaret beamed with a smile, and her heart felt like it might leap out of her chest. She exclaimed, "You think so? I'd be so happy to become Liam's wife. And really, I'm so grateful to both of you for being here right now, for both of you entering my life. After all, I was a lonely pregnant girl." "Thank you, guys." Vivian smiled and said, "I'll be happy to visit this little warrior, too. I hope he'll get used to me." For Margaret's discharge, Liam had prepared meticulously. He arrived in a rented white car, dressed in an expensive suit, a pristine white shirt, and carried a huge bouquet of flowers. Vivian had been in Margaret's room in the morning, helping her get ready. "All right, your Romeo is downstairs, eagerly waiting. And we're all set. Shall we go?" Vivian asked. Margaret was puzzled. "Vivian, what's all this for? It's like we're preparing for a wedding." "I'm just getting discharged." "Why all these fancy outfits?" The nurse smiled and said, "One thing I can tell you is that there's a surprise waiting for you." Margaret stepped outside, and Liam quickly approached her, proudly held Tyler in his arms, and handed her a beautiful box. "I congratulate you on the birth of our son. I want to put this ring on your finger as a sign that we are more than just friends. I love you, my dear, and I want you to be my wife, and Tyler, my son. Will you marry me?" Liam asked. All the nurses clapped, and the sound of a champagne bottle popping open echoed. It seemed like everyone got teary-eyed. Even the elderly janitor left his broom and watched with affection. Margaret could no longer contain her emotions and simply wept, whispering softly, "I agree. I love you too, and I can't help myself." Then they went to celebrate Tyler's birth. Margaret soon moved into Liam's mansion, and they had a wedding. Liam adopted the little one, giving him his last name. Their relationship wasn't harmonious right from the start, and it was challenging for both of them, but it was always Tyler who reconciled them. It happened that the baby was drawn to Liam. He would calm down and fall asleep in his arms, not being fussy. In those moments, the warmth and brightness filled Liam's heart, and all the silly grudges and arguments took a backseat. The newlyweds would always make up beside their son's crib, looking at him with affection, stroking his tiny fingers, and saying aloud, "We are such fools. Let's go for a walk with our little one." 3 years passed. The family lived in harmony. Tyler grew and started attending daycare. Liam fulfilled Margaret's long-standing dream and gave her a car, so the once restless cab driver occasionally took trips. She derived immense pleasure from the experience. Margaret learned patience and respect during this time, and she realized that a family was hard work. She appreciated her husband for his loyalty, dedication, generosity, and care. The woman never regretted marrying Liam. Winter arrived, and her husband had an excellent proposal for Margaret. "My love, how about going on a vacation by the ocean? What's stopping us? We'll soak up the sun. What do you think?" Margaret squealed with joy. "Of course, I've never been to the ocean, and I've always wanted to go. You're the best." Tyler clapped his hands merrily, and preparations began. The couple visited a travel agency to select a suitable family tour. Liam and Margaret sat in comfortable chairs with Tyler in her arms, and a manager approached them. The woman mechanically greeted them and didn't realize why the man stood frozen in his place. Upon closer inspection, she realized it was her ex-boyfriend, Andrew. It turned out that over all these years, he hadn't made much progress in his career and was still a manager, just as before. Margaret immediately remembered their breakup and decided to repay him with indifference, pretending not to remember him. "Good day. My husband and I, along with our son, would like to choose a family tour to the ocean. What can you offer us?" Margaret inquired. Andrew could barely hold himself together, stammered and mumbled, unable to respond adequately. In his mind, there was only one thought. Could it really be that this plain waitress, Margaret? No way. She's such a magnificent lady, a beauty. Her husband appears wealthy, and the little one is so lovely. He even looks a bit like me. Wait a minute. She was pregnant when I left her. What if this is my son? Through the haze of his thoughts, he heard Liam's voice. Sir, are you even listening to me? I've been talking for ages about where we'd like to go. I think we'd be better off going to a different agency. This service is entirely unsatisfactory. But Andrew acted as if he hadn't heard him, took a deep breath, and mustered up the courage. Margaret, don't you recognize me? It's Andrew. Tell me, is this my son? What's his name? Liam raised an eyebrow and responded firmly, he's my son. Any more questions? You're clearly not in your right mind. Margaret, let's go from here. We've just wasted our time. What a lunatic. Margaret responded peaceably. Don't be angry, my love. People make mistakes sometimes. Liam took his wife and son by the hand, and they left the agency. For a long time, he couldn't calm down and blamed himself for losing such a woman. Bridget had left him long ago. He hadn't made any progress in his career, and he was still living with his parents. His only entertainment was beer and weekend football. That's how life had passed. Today, seeing Margaret so happy, he suddenly felt a deep regret and anger at himself. Now, his son called another man dad, and he was no longer loved. What did he have left? There weren't many women eager to marry a simple manager without prospects. It was only Margaret who had once loved him so sincerely and faithfully. Oh, if he could turn back time, he would never have let her go. Margaret and Liam went on a holiday, got tanned, and had a great time. A month later, they received another surprise. Margaret found out she was pregnant. Liam hugged and kissed her, twirled her around, and celebrated like a child. Margaret thought to herself, if someone had told me that I would meet a wanderer on the road, marry him, and have his child, I wouldn't have believed it. And now, I'm the happiest person alive. Fate works in mysterious ways. Margaret decided to play matchmaker in her best friend's love life and introduced her to Liam's friend and partner, Thomas. It turned out to be a great idea. They ignited a passionate romance, and soon Vivian was also pregnant. The best friends, now both expecting, discussed their situations, went to doctor's appointments, and enthusiastically prepared for motherhood. Both families often gathered for joint vacations, played volleyball, and simply enjoyed their time together, filled with joy and laughter. To be loved is more than to be wealthy, because being loved means being happy. This simple truth is known to all, but not everyone in life is fortunate enough to love and be loved. However, our heroes achieved it.